Alrighty, hey there, Your Health Nation. Hopefully you guys are doing awesome today. It's Thursday, that means we're closing in on the end of the week, so Friday's coming, right? That's awesome. Getting close to the weekend. Um, but today we wanted to talk about the power of language, and I'm going to propose a couple of questions here, and then we'll dive into it. But what if every word you uttered came true instantly? What if you were required to follow through on everything you said? How would that change the language you use? This is when you start to think about it in those terms. Words do matter. When you think of the fact that language permeates everything that we do. This goes from everything we speak out loud, obviously, but especially our internal thoughts. I mean, we think through words most of the time, right? There's this internal dialogue that we're constantly got going on in our head. So this means that the words you use, not only out loud, but also internally, have a tremendous amount of power. It can fuel your confidence and ambition, but it can also make you feel worried and imperfect. And this is why you want to be conscious of, what you're saying not only out loud, but what you're saying inside your head. Sigmund Freud has a great quote. It says, "Words have a magical power. They can either bring great happiness or the deepest despair." And the old saying of sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me is so, so, so untrue. And to go from childhood, where you repeat that phrase, and then if you actually internalize it and start thinking about it, it implies that words that we say don't matter, but they actually really do. And to me, this is where, you say something, and once it's out there, you can't take it back. You can't undo the damage that the words have done or the positive outcome. So there's just so much going on with the words we talk about. And this is where language, the words we use, changes your mind. It shapes your thought. It makes a huge difference in the world just by what is said or not said. And this is something that I think is so crucial to understand, is because when we're talking, what we say does impact who's listening. And that, more importantly, when we're having that internal dialogue, what are we telling ourselves? Because that essentially becomes our reality. Uh, and this is why it's so important to be aware of the language we use. Because if it becomes reality, I mean, if you're talking about negative things all the time internally, or you talk about positive things all the time internally, whatever one you're doing is what you're going to end up with. And so this is where psychologists have found that our subconscious mind actually interprets what we hear very literally. It's not until we're actually paying attention to body language, tone, all of those things, that maybe we can pick up on other meanings to words and what's said. Um, so this is why it's so important to understand this great quote from George Orwell. It's that if thought corrupts language, language can also corrupt thought. Another one from Deepak Chopra, which I also like a lot, is language creates reality. Words have power, so speak always to create joy. And so this essentially comes down to whatever a person believes is going to happen will happen. And it's part of the whole concept of, we're putting the message out there to the universe. So that means we're, looking for that. And what we look for, we will find. So this is something that I think is so fundamental that many people often overlook, is just the importance of what we are telling ourselves every day. Yes, what we speak out loud is important, but most people are aware of, not to necessarily regulate everything that they say, but they have some filtering there. It's our internal thought process that is so much more detrimental, because that impacts us obviously personally, but impacts us in such a wide variety of ways. And so Betty Eady, who's an international best-selling author, has a quote here that I think is also so important. And I'm a huge fan of quotes, so you guys have to bear with me here, because I think sometimes some people just get it so right and they sum it up much better than anyone possibly can. So for Betty Eadie's quote, it says, "If we understood the power of our thoughts, we would guard them more closely. If we understood the awesome power of our words, we would prefer silence to almost anything negative. In our thoughts and words, we create our own weaknesses and our own strengths." And this is something that I think is so, so profound. Our thoughts and words create our own weaknesses and our own strengths. And that right there sums it up just so beautifully. It's the idea that what we are telling ourselves is, shaping if we think that we're good at something or if we think we're bad at something. And this gets to the whole concept, and I know we sort of touched upon this before, the concept of mindset, growth versus fix. And once again, this is from Carol Dweck, who was a professor of psychology at Stanford. And she coined this back in, I think, the mid to late 80s. So it's not necessarily a new concept, but obviously with the focus of mindset and mindfulness and all that in recent years, it's coming back around as far as being popular. And this is the idea of that one group of people believe that talent is innate and effort has no effect on the outcome of something. Those are the individuals who have more of a fixed mindset. The other group of people have a belief that with enough work and effort, they can improve their abilities. And these people have a growth mindset. And the concept of mindset of these two actually start as children. And this is also true as far as the words we use, is that internal dialogue that we start to build happens from the time we're little. And it's influenced obviously by our environment, by who we're interacting with, by what we see, essentially the adults in our lives, how they interact, as far as what they do, what they believe, what words are they saying. Often what typically our parents are our caregivers when we're little. Whoever our caregiver is, whatever they're telling us, often that becomes that internal dialogue that we continue to have as adults. That's not to say it has to be that way. This is where you can change your thought process in the words you use. And we'll get into how to do that here in just a little bit. But that's what is, so many people don't realize, is the internal dialogue that we have is something that we develop over time. We're not born with that. So, and this is where, the language you use to describe your state of mind at any given moment actively shapes what's going to happen. And this is why it's so essential to get into the habit of transforming your vocabulary and into a more positive, helpful way rather than looking at the negative all the time. And this is something that a key component here is you have to broaden the vocabulary you're using, right? And this is where learning new words, reading more, doing whatever to be able to broaden that reach that you have as far as vocabulary. Each word is different as far as, and that's the things, we often use words interchangeably that really aren't supposed to be used interchangeably. And so this is where by having a broad vocabulary, you have greater access to the amount of words that you have to be able to use for your internal dialogue. And this is something that I think is so key, is obviously by having a broader vocabulary, you have more words. Key here is focusing on positive words, more positive words to be able to have new ideas and new thinking. And this is going to directly influence what you feel and what you believe. That's where, when we're having a more optimistic outlook, it's not like it's magical powers. You're not going to magically change everything. But when you have positive thoughts, positive words you're using, you're creating more of an optimistic outlook. When you have that optimistic outlook, that is what you're going to need to have a successful outcome. It's going to happen because that's what you're looking for. And it allows you to build self-confidence. I mean, when you think about, when you're feeling good, feeling positive, you have more self-confidence than if you are feeling bad about yourself. So this is why you need to develop more positive affirmations, the way you're talking to yourself. And so the first step of all of this, as far as being able to do it, you've got to create an awareness, right? We have to be aware of how we're talking to ourselves. and obviously how we talk to others, but usually we're a little more aware of that. It's the internal dialogue that we're not necessarily so focused on, and if you're constantly telling yourself you're not good at something, you can't do something, then that's what you're going to believe, right? Um, so this is where, when we're speaking, and especially to speaking to others, we are more, especially if we're afraid that our idea or request or whatever we're about to say might be rejected, we often use confusing language that's indirect, um, and this is often as a way to try to manipulate the outcome to our favor. And this uses a lot of energy to be able to do this. And this is why it's so important to not. And this is where, as you become more positive in your thoughts, you're going to have that self-confidence, and you're not going to need to do this. And the reason is that when we say a committed direct statement, we know we're going to be expected to follow through on that. And this is why we try to come up with messaging that when we don't want to do something, rather than just outright saying, no, I don't want to do that, or I can't do that because of, if you have someone's coming to you and asking you for, you know, they need you to help them with something, but you've already got your plate full, rather than, you don't want to let that person down, but at the same time, you know that by taking it on, you're going to be overwhelmed and have too much to do for yourself. And then, so often we devise subtle ways of our messaging that when we're responding, that we're not really willing to do what we're saying we're doing, or the way we phrase it, the person who is listening expects us to bail out on our agreement to do it. So a great way to give an example of this is the phrase, I'll try. I'll try to do that, or I'll try to be there, but in reality, we aren't going to be there, and that's the whole thing. So this is where, rather than using confusing, indirect language, be concise, be direct. Is people initially might not necessarily like that, but over time, you're going to see, you're going to be in a much better place. You're going to feel healthier. You're going to be less likely to need to use that manipulative language yourself when asking for things or responding to things, because you're being more true to who you are internally. And people will respect that and come to know that, okay, when you say you're going to do something or be there, you're going to do it or be there. And if you say that you can't, then you can't. And you don't require yourself to give a person a reason why, but if you're not going to be there, they learn to trust your word. And that is something that is so important, right? When we're building relationships, is having that sense of trust. So by being direct and concise, that's where you're going in your language to someone else. That's where you're going to, slowly start to build that. It takes time, and it takes a lot of practice, right? Because we're just so conditioned to not do that. The other big thing is less is more when it comes to words. Um, so the more words you use to say something, the less power those words have. And I think that is something that is so crucial, is that oftentimes, as humans, we're usually uncomfortable with silence or lapses in conversation. So we have a tendency to try to fill in those silent moments with words. Often you don't need to do that. That's okay. Normal conversation has lapses, and you just have to get comfortable with that silence. So when you're trying to talk to someone else, try to get your message out in as few words as possible. And this is where having a broad vocabulary is so helpful, is because you're going to be able to say exactly what you mean in limited amount of words, so that way what you're saying is impactful and you're not wasting words on, just anything. So this is why, essentially any other word is filler. It's just filling time, filling space. Are they needed? No. And this is why, when you have to be willing to speak what you want in a clear, concise way. That way, have an opinion, don't apologize for it. And that doesn't mean be confrontational with your opinion. That just means express how you feel about your current reality. And could be obviously happy, joyful, excited, but it also could be sad, scared, or hopeless. You just have to declare whatever it is you're feeling, and that's put it out there in terms that are clear and concise. Um, and this is where, that does take a lot of practice because often we're uncomfortable with that. So, start with easy things. Obviously, it's easy to talk about when you are in positive modes, right? It's not so easy to talk about things that don't usually feel comfortable sharing. And so over time, as you practice with the positive stuff, start to include the negative stuff, and eventually that'll become easier as well. And then the other issue that we have when we're communicating with people is that words and phrases mean different things to different people, right? Depending on what we have grown up with, what one person says and what they mean by that could be totally different from the person who's listening to the message, interprets. Um, so if we hear things that we're eager, open, or resentful or hostile to, usually it's the extremes, then um, our interpretation of those is what is being said is drastically different because we're looking for certain keywords. So the key thing is if you don't necessarily understand, or you don't think you understand, or even if you just want to confirm what the speaker is telling you, ask for clarification. And you can do this by using an active listening method. And the way to do this is to essentially sort of play back to the person who's communicating to you, the speaker, what you've interpreted from their communication. So that way you try to remove any vagueness from what is being said. So what the key thing to do here is ask the person, so what I'm hearing you say is, or this is what I have interpreted your message to be, and then you give them back verbatim what you've heard. So that way you have a clear understanding of what they said. They can clarify anything that maybe what they intended to say was different from what came out. So that is so important. And you want to speak about the present moment. Right now, don't tie past emotions, future worries, anything like that into your present moment. And that's where, our experiences help shape who we are, but we're not living in the past, right? We're living right now with an eye towards the future, where we want to go. And you can't live in the past to get to the future. Yes, take what you've learned from the past. That's shaped who you are in the current moment, but it doesn't have to mean who you are in the future. And this is where by focusing on the present moment and focusing on what you're saying and experiencing right now, without tying it to the past is so key because this is, when you're communicating with someone and you're trying to convey certain things, yes, sometimes you need to give context from the past if they don't know you well enough to know what's going on. But other times, you don't need to draw up past experiences and put it into your current conversation. If there's no real value to it, and that's something that I think so many people, we all get caught up in. I mean, when we're having a conversation, and somebody's just saying something, and it triggers, oh yeah, I had experience with this, in the past. And if they're asking for advice and you want to share, that's one thing. Most often time people are just talking because they feel a need to express themselves, and you can use your past experience and provide insightful comments without having to actually go delve into all of the past experiences that you've had. So that's just something to keep in mind. It's all about being clear, concise, and using as little words as possible, because that's what we said, words have power. When you have less words, more power, right? Another big thing here I want to talk about is the word I. I is such a supercharged word. And this is when we were talking about I statements. Okay, so here, great example of a negative one is I can't. It implies that the circumstances that are currently going on are outside of your control and are running things in your life, and you have no power to change them. Essentially, it's that whole victim mindset, right? And so this is anything similar to that. I don't know. I am not sure. Or you followed the word I with some sort of ambivalent, unclear statement. Or it can be the whole concept of another big one is I want, right? That implies right there is that we're yearning for something. I want to do this, or I want that car, or whatever it is. It means that you're to desire without having. And so when we use the phrase I want to describe something that we want in the future, right? That we want to obtain, it always is going to have that. It's the desire to have without having. This is where simple shift. Switch it over to I am. I am blank. And this is so important as far as reframing the I statements from being negative to positive is so impactful. This means that it's shifting your whole mindset from that negative to the positive. And when you're looking at something, instead of saying, I want to be a healthy eater, if you're trying to diet and you're trying to get better in health, you say, I am a healthy eater. And then you put into action the steps you need to in order to fulfill that. And just having that whole positive mindset, just that simple shift of one word is enough that it's going to reframe what you're thinking and how you act, right? And I think that is something, and this doesn't mean it makes it easier to do what you're doing. It just allows you to feel that desired state immediately in the here, the now. And that is, okay, I am a healthy eater. Well, if I am a healthy eater, what does that mean that I do? Versus I want to be a healthy eater. That means I've got the desire to be a healthy eater, but I'm not one right now. Versus I am a healthy eater means, yes, I'm a healthy eater right now. What does that mean? Does that mean I, bring eat carrots for my snack versus the candy? Yes, that's what it does. So right there, that and it's that subtle shift. I mean, it's a mental thing that it's hard to fathom how little, literally changing one word can do that. But it's about the energy inside your head. And that's something that I think is so key is when we are doing that shift. And this is, I would say, is probably one of the biggest components of this. If you take nothing else away from today's video, take away the concept of using language of empowerment and choice. And these are the words I am, I can, I will, I choose, I have, I love, I create, I enjoy. So this is where it's so key. You're talking from your own experience. You're not using the word you, you're using the word I. So when you're communicating, this is how you're communicating how you feel. And then you want to be able to communicate in a way that's positive. And this is where using those terms I just mentioned is so important because of the concept that when we are speaking into ourselves, let alone speaking out loud, if we are framing it in such a positive way, that indicates that you're more likely to do something. You're more likely to achieve something when you're thinking about it in positive terms. If we're setting ourselves up in negative terms, that's what we're going to end up with. So that is where the simple concept of just rephrasing it, is so important. And then the other key aspect here is the power of the word yet. You want to add yet at the end of a phrase. So what this implies is that you're not finished learning and eventually will reach your goal. So for instance, if you want to learn how to play the guitar, you're going to be like, well, I can't play the guitar yet, but I'm making really great progress. Versus the concept of I can't play the guitar, right? So it could be simply be I can't play the guitar yet. That indicates that you're not done learning. That indicates you're going to keep persevering, and eventually you will be able to play the guitar, right? You just have to practice. But it's about mindset. It's about switching the language we use. How powerful is that one little word at the end? I can't play the guitar versus I can't play the guitar yet. I mean, that applies to anything. So, I mean, it could be physical related. I can't run. I can't run yet. Maybe you're just starting your exercise routine. Maybe there's something else that's going on, but that's not to imply you can't get there. It's, but if you think of the concept of I can't run, that's what you're going to tell yourself, and you won't run. If you think of the concept I can't run yet, then you're going to shift that. And I think that is something that is so, so important. And this is where, to me, the words we use, we often do it automatically and unconsciously. And we've learned to treat them lightly. So we often speak the majority of our words from habit, convenience, social obligation, rather than from the clear intent that we should be. And I think this is, once we realize the potential that language has to create and transform our lives, that's when we start to pay a lot more attention to what we're actually saying. And this is why we have to become conscious and insightful of our choices of the words that we use. And, you know, and not only in how we express ourselves to others, obviously how we interpret them, but how we talk to ourselves. I mean, that is such a key factor, right? We all need to have good internal dialogue, because if we're constantly telling ourselves, you know, negative thoughts, that's not helpful, you know, it's, as far as your own overall well-being, but obviously your mental well-being. And this is where, I mean, having positive thoughts, having positive language we use is so important. And if you ever listen to any successful person, you know, you're going to notice that they use language that is positive, explicit, action focused, and steadily puts a pledge of trust in their relationships. I mean, think of famous people, Tony Robbins. I mean, when they're talking, how are they talking? What are they saying? You know, what is the message that they're putting out there? And so to me, I think that is something that is so fundamental, is that we have to choose our words carefully, not only before we say them out loud, but what we're telling ourselves. And remember, even the smallest shift, just simply changing one word in a sentence, is enough that you're going to have more action-oriented and positive affirmations that are going to have immediate impact on your energy, outlook, and sense of control in life. And I think this is something that is so helpful when you actually start doing it. Remember, when we're speaking, it ends up becoming a self-fulfilling prophecy. So what we say out loud often happens. And so key concept here to remember is where your words lead, your mind and body will follow. So you want to speak and think only that which you choose to have to come into reality, not only for the now, but continuously. So essentially what we're saying becomes our truth. So if we are talking to ourselves in negative terms, that's what we're going to see. That's what we're going to have in life. If we're talking to ourselves in positive terms, that's all the doors open. It's all up to us. And it all starts with awareness and then making a few simple changes. So what I encourage you guys to do is to start practicing today. You know, if you catch yourself using the negative terms, I'll try, I can't, I want, start shifting it to the other things. I am, I can, I will. Or obviously put the word yet at the end if you're talking about something that you're working on. I mean, that right there, those two key things are fundamental to being successful when it comes to using language to alter your thought process. And over time, it becomes easier. So it starts with practice. So start today. If you guys have questions, comments, let me know how it's going. Put it in the comment section. Send me a message. I'd love to hear from you guys about it. I mean, it's not something that I mastered. So it's something I work with each day. And that's something that I encourage you guys to do. Whatever tips I offer, I'm still working on some of them as well. It's just that I've had a little bit more experience in doing it because I've been doing it a little bit longer, and I want to share with you guys. you know, the positive things I've got going on and that I want for you. So thank you guys for joining me today. You guys have a good rest of your work week. Have a great weekend, and I will see you guys next week. Stay healthy.